Jasenovac camp was established by the Ustasha government in 1941, and it was the biggest camp on territory of independent state of Croatia. So it was a kind of camp that was similar to the Nazi concentration camp that existed in occupied Europe at that time. The commander of all the camps in independent state of Croatia, Vjekoslav Luborić, actually in 1941 visited Sachsenhausen camp near Berlin, Germany, and he wanted to implement the same model of the concentration camp here in Jasenovac, in independent state of Croatia. What was specific, what was different from the Nazi camps was the main group of the victims. So in the ideology of the Ustasha movement, their main enemies, they consider Serbs as the main enemies. So when we look at the numbers of victims, the biggest ethnical group that was deported to the camp and the biggest number of victims are coming from the Serbian ethnical group. Also, there were racial laws in the independent state of Croatia. So based on the racial laws, Jews and the Roma were also deported to the camp, and also political prisoners. So Croats, Bosnian Muslims, Slovenians, members of other ethnical groups were also deported to the camp. So to legally define what happened in Jasenovac camp during Second World War, it was a place of the Holocaust against the Jews, place of the genocide against the Serbs and the Roma people, and crimes against humanity against members of the other ethnical groups who opposed Ustasha government. When we come to this issue, the numbers of victims, and something that was disputed and talked about, basically almost still at the time when the camp existed, and after liberation of the camp from 1945, 1946, already first assessments were made. So the first official assessment was made in 1946 by the commission that was established by the Yugoslav government that was dealing with war crimes that were committed on territory of Yugoslavia. And in 1946 they published a small book, and they mentioned that in Jasenovac camp somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000 victims were killed. And immediately after that also Yugoslavia demanded reparation from Germany for the crimes that were committed on territory of Yugoslavia. And in those documents it was assessed that about 1.7 million people altogether on territory of Yugoslavia were killed, so regardless of the place where they were killed. And out of that number, 700,000 were killed here in Jasenovac camp. So these numbers become official numbers in period of Yugoslavia, and if you look in the encyclopedia of the Yugoslavia, you can see these numbers mentioning under the name, the title Jasenovac. In the 1960s, there was an attempt by the Federal Institute of Statistics to find exactly the names of the victims, so the persons who were killed. And they sent their researchers throughout the country, and the goal was to establish those numbers and basically to confirm the numbers that were officially already in the public. And not only for Jasenovac camp, but also for the victims altogether all over Yugoslavia. And in 1964, this research was finished, and altogether they found about 600,000 names of the victims, regardless of the place where they were killed. And out of that number, 59,000 names of the victims killed in Jasenovac camp. But since this research didn't really match these numbers that were already official, this research was actually never published. So it was in the archives of this institution, Federal Bureau of Statistics. And only some historians and politicians were actually aware of this research and the results of the research. And only in the 1990s, these documents were actually somehow smuggled out of this institution. And in 1998, the Bosniak Institute actually published the book with those 59,000 names of the victims killed in Jasenovac's camp. So we as an institution, Jasenovac Memorial Site, somewhere around 2005, started working on our victims list, and the goal of that research was to find as many names as possible of the people killed in Jasenovac's camp. So through work in archives, in different national or local archives, through going through literature or some local victims list that was published in a particular county, municipality, with the contacts with families of the victims, we try to make this list as correct as possible. So at the moment, in our database, we have about 83,000 records of the victims, and we always try to emphasize that this is not total number. It's impossible to find the exactly name by name how many people were killed, because when you go through the archives, when you go through these different documents and the victims list, sometimes under this section, place of death, it stands unknown, because somebody was arrested, deported somewhere, they didn't return, didn't survive the war, but there's just not enough evidence to establish what happened to that person and to claim if they were killed in any particular place, in any particular camp. So we are always clear to emphasize that this is a not total number. The number is probably higher than that, but for us it's also difficult to try to guess what would be that total number. So we are careful not to go into public with any specific numbers. So because of all these reasons that happened, even now today, there are certain disputes about the number of the victims. And but what I try to say already, and what I emphasize, I think what we know for sure that based on the racial laws and based on the ideology of the Ustasha movement, the whole families were deported to this camp. When we talk about the Serbs, the Jews, the Roma, and legally it's kind of definition of the genocide and what happened. So intentions of the Ustasha movement and results of those intentions are very clear, and this is something that cannot be disputed. So what I can mention also any specific numbers of the victim groups. The biggest number that were killed, they were Serbs. So we have about 47,000 records about the Serbs killed in a camp, which would make more than 50% of the victims. And this is something also different from the Nazi camps, because in those camps the biggest number of the victims were Jews. So the second biggest group would be Roma. So about 16,000 records we have about Roma, about 13,000 of the Jewish victims, and in smaller numbers other ethnic groups, about 4,000 Croats, about 1,000 Bosnian Muslims, about 250 Slovenians, and in smaller numbers also other smaller ethnic groups that were living in the territory of Croatia and Yugoslavia in the period of the Second World War.
What you clarified about the numbers was used very much also reading books, like for example Slavko Goldstein, one of the last analyses that are reporting almost the same numbers. He said, and others, that it was used for ideological manipulation, specifically had an impact when the war started in Bosnia. Regarding the asking for revenge by the Serbs regarding to Jasenovac and manipulating with the 700,000 victims. So my question will be, from your research and from your way of dealing with this, how you could describe what was going on, if it's some specific way of how these manipulations with the numbers were used, and if this changed historically.
Again, I guess we have to go a little back and not start with the war in the 90s to come back into the 1980s. And several years ago, Associated Press published their video archive online, and in I think 1984 or 85 they visited Jasenovac's memorial site, and they talked with the director at the time. She was called Anna Požar, And she gave some responses to the question about the camp and about the history of the place. And when she was talking about the victims, she said Jasenovac camp is the place where 700,000 Yugoslavs were killed. So that was basically the kind of the official, the narrative that existed in the 1980s. So when they talked about victims, they didn't really emphasize the ethnicity of any particular victims. So they were all considered as our victims, meaning Yugoslav victims. So that was the kind of official story. And it kind of slowly started changing and shifting in the mid-80s, late 80s, with the rise of the nationalism in Yugoslavia. And this history of the Jasenovac camp kind of proved as something unresolved. And people felt that the government, Yugoslav government, didn't really deal with it appropriately. And with official policies of the Brotherhood and Unity, it was kind of, I would say, challenging for the government how to approach this place, because the crimes in this place didn't come from outside of the borders of the Yugoslavia. So the people who committed the crimes, the perpetrators, were Croats by ethnicity. And how do you deal with that? So I guess they tried to deal by looking more into the future and not so much into the past. And also example of that would be the big monument that was built in the 1966 by the architect Bogdanovic, the flower monument. And the idea was that this monument shouldn't represent any particular ethnicity or religion. It's very universal, the symbol of the flower, and also it's kind of symbol of hope and better future from this horrible and tragical place. So when you have this kind of feeling that you never really received justice from these horrible crimes that happened during the Second World War, I think it's kind of easy to manipulate with the people. And this memory of the Jasenovac, I think, was used by the nationalists in the 1990s. And politicians would say, we cannot let Jasenovac happen again. So it kind of mobilizes the people. And it's easy then to go in this kind of, again, circle of violence that repeated itself again in the 1990s.
Are there any differences regarding the way how Memorial Center Jasenovac was treated in Yugoslavia by Yugoslavian authorities, and how it is treated now in independent modern Croatia?
I would say Yugoslavian government was basically formed after the Second World War, and the memory of the Second World War was something quite important. This is where they found the legitimization of their government in the fight against the occupiers and the local collaborators. So at the time when Memorial was established in the 1968, school groups from all over Yugoslavia would come and visit this place. So there was never really kind of official document where they say that school groups have to visit this place, but it was kind of just felt for the school groups that they should come here, and the numbers of visitors that Jasenovac Memorial site had at the time, so we're talking about late 70s, the early 1980s, there was some 300,000 up to 400,000 visitors per year. And school groups would visit these kind of places that were commemorated the famous battles of the Second World War, and also Jasenovac Memorial site. So the Kozara Memorial is not so far away from here, also commemorating the Battle of Kozara from 1942. So school groups will always visit Jasenovac and later Kozara, or maybe first Kozara, then later Jasenovac. It's very much connected to memorials, which is maybe hour and a half drive from one place to the other. And today in Republic of Croatia, I think the main memory is the memory of the Croatian War of Independence in 1990s, and not so much the memory of the Second World War. So in the last few years, what happened that in 8th grade of the elementary school, it's become mandatory, or the funds were founded that that school groups would visit Vukovar Memorial that deals with the Battle of Vukovar in 1991. So this is where now school groups go, and visits to the Jasenovac Memorial site are basically up to the schools or up to the history teachers, so they can organize something on their own. And if there are no money allocated, like you said, then it's always a problem with the money, and that's why the number of visitors are much less than the ones in the 70s and the 80s. For example, last year we had altogether 16,000 visitors. That's 16,000, and only 15 school groups. That's 15 school groups that visited Jasenovac Memorial site from Croatia. And so you can see these kind of differences between the memory of the Croatian War of Independence and the Second World War.
In the last years, very present the dispute, because when it's the official Memorial Day, practically also I think this year it was a separate delegation coming with the Jewish, and actually they connected with the Serbian commemorative group, and on the other part it was the official state commemorations. Could you give a light what kind of dispute is at the basis, and what are actually the future of such a dispute? I mean, how this could be solved, and what is the expectations?
Well, annual commemoration date in Jasenovac Memorial Site is 22nd April. This is the day of liberation of the camp, so basically the last day of the camp, and this is the day where this commemoration takes place. But what we are witnessing now, that's now 4 years in a row, started in 2016, and the situation is same now in 2019, that we have separated commemorations. So members of the victim groups, of the Serbian community in Croatia, Jewish community in Croatia, Second World War Fighters Association, they basically boycott this official commemoration, and they organize their own commemoration, which takes place a few days earlier or sometimes a few days after this official commemoration. As for the Roma community, their representatives, they come to all commemorations, including the official one and also the one organized by the other victims group. So basically it started in 2016, and I would say the main reason why it happened at the time was a situation with the government that existed at the time, where the Minister of Culture, and Jasenovac Memorial Site is under Ministry of Culture of Croatia, was Mr. Zlatko Hasanbegovic, and he's a man with a very controversial past. In his youth, he was a member of these far-right organizations when he was writing for their kind of magazines, newspapers, and very much connected with this far-right movement. And it was just, I would say, unacceptable for the groups to have this man as a minister of culture. And also some issues that were not resolved from before, because from 2014 we have a council of the Jasenovac Memorial Site where members of these victim groups are also represented, and the new council was not formed, so for 2 years it didn't really exist. And I think everything kind of came together, and they decided not to come to the official commemoration and to organize their own commemoration. Later, next year, in 2017, government changed, or, well, the party that was ruling was the same, but the new people from the party came, I would say more moderate people, but something else happened, that in a village, Jasenovac, which is just right next to the memorial, one of the war veterans association from the Croatian War of Independence, they erected the flag, and in their emblem, in their symbol, they use this Za dom spremni salute, which was used by the Ustasha during Second World War. And during Croatian War of Independence in the 1990s, these paramilitary groups would also use this salute. So when this flag was erected, it again started controversy, and representatives of the victim groups again decided to boycott the official commemoration. And again, in the meantime, this flag was displaced, and now it's in some 20 kilometers from here in a city nearby. It's not here in Jasenovac, but the groups were again not satisfied with this solution, and they feel that this Za dom spremni salute, it shouldn't be possible to have it anywhere. Not only that should be banned in Jasenovac, but everywhere on territory of Croatia. And these all events that happened in the last years have led to this divided commemoration, and this is a situation that also happened this year. So there was one official commemoration and other one organized by the victim groups.
It was a lot of controversy when Tudjman, the late president of the independent or contemporary Croatia, how he was attacked regarding the attitude toward Jasenovac, and also toward the question who actually died and how to think about the memorial site. It's any kind of research regarding this, an impact on what's going on also today regarding the site, or this was just at that point and had other, let's say, ideological and other purposes?
Okay, to start from beginning. So basically, when Croatian War of Independence started in 1991, the battles were also fought on the territory of Jasenovac as well. So for 4 years, from 1991 until 1995, area of Jasenovac was not under the control of the Croatian government. So it was under control of the rebel Serbs under the territory of the Republika Srpska Krajina. So basically, museum was closed, and there was one curator that was on the Serbian side of the front line. And in 1991, he came to the museum, and he took all of the artifacts, documents, photographs, objects, and they were taken to the Republika Srpska, so Serbian part of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in Operation Bljesak, Flash, when Croatia again retook control of the Jasenovac site, that was May 1995, they found the museum that was completely empty, and there was nothing here. So negotiations started how to return all of these materials, and since it was immediately after the war, there was a lot of mistrust, and these negotiations went nowhere for several years, and only when the USA got involved in 2000, agreement was signed, and first all of these materials and documents, artifacts, they were first transported from Banja Luka to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, and only later, year later in 2001, they were returned to the Jasenovac Memorial Site. And after revision of these documents and photographs, objects, we found out that about 70% of the materials were returned, and for other 30% we're not sure what happened, if they are destroyed during the war or...
What kind of material?
Mostly the paper documents. They were not found. So of the object collection, so kind of the what you can feel, and they were mostly returned. Also the photographs, but these kind of documents that there were contacts with the families of the victims and also with survivors, and they would put some kind of their memories, testimonies of the period in the camp. No, they were the ones that we don't have at the moment, and we don't know what happened with them. But yeah, to come back what I was talking about, basically Jasenovac Memorial Site Museum was closed for 15 years, from 1991 until 2006. The new exhibition, new permanent exhibition, only opened in 2006. So to come back to your question about Tudjman and what he was trying to do, he visited Jasenovac Memorial Site in 1996, and later he had a speech in a parliament, and when he was talking about something that he was often talking about, and that is this kind of reconciliation of the Croatian people, and he saw it as a reconciliation between partisans and their ancestors, and Ustasha and their ancestors. And in that sense, he mentioned as Jasenovac as a place where you could remember all the victims of the Second World War, so place of the remembrance for the both partisans, the anti-fascists, and for the Ustasha as well. And that speech created quite a lot of controversy, and both in Croatia and also in international circles. So this idea never actually was materialized, so it only remained as an idea. Because in those periods of the 1990s, when Tudjman was still president of the Republic of Croatia, the Memorial Museum was not really opened. The memorial started with the work only in 1998, but without the Memorial Museum, only some people were able to visit the site of the former camp with the monument.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about the current status of this Tudjman's reconciliation project? I mean, on what was it based, and how does it function today on the political scene in Croatia?
Well, Croatia was very much divided society during Second World War. So on the one side, you had people who joined or supported Ustasha movement, so collaborators of the Nazi Germany and the fascist Italy. And on the other side, there was a resistance movement, partisans, where also a lot of people joined and or supported it in some way. And I guess we can see that division very much alive even now in contemporary Croatia in 2019, and especially during this period of this kind of anniversaries, commemorations, from commemoration here in Jasenovac, from commemoration in what's happening in Bleiburg every May. And I don't think our society has found the right way how to deal with this memory of the Second World War. Because, for example, if you go to the Zagreb, the capital city of Croatia, there is no museum dedicated to the Second World War. And we are talking about the significant number of victims that were killed from territory of Croatia during that 4 years' time when Second World War existed. On both sides, I'm not mentioning ethnicities, so I'm talking about Croats, Serbs, Jews, Roma, other ones. So altogether we are talking about more than 200,000, maybe up to 300,000 victims in that 4-year period. And our society, until now, obviously didn't find the right way how to deal with it and how to tell that story, what was happening in that 4 years' time. So Croatian History Museum doesn't have a permanent exhibition. They only have some temporary exhibition, or there's any specific museum dedicated to the Second World War. So basically, Jasenovac Memorial Site is only national museum that deals with any topic of the Second World War. So if you ask me what is the situation with this reconciliation policy, I don't think that it actually happened. We still feel that divisions, and society is very much divided.
But you wouldn't say that the project failed, or you regard it as an ongoing process, or?
Well, I wouldn't call it a success, obviously. I wouldn't call it a success because people are very much still emotional when they talk about what happened about Second World War. So it's not that we are talking about kind of something distant that happened in history. It seems something that's still very much emotional when people talk about it, and not just the politicians, but also with ordinary people. If you talk about, they still feel that the real truth is not out there, and that, I don't know, will appear from somewhere, but I'm not sure which groups in society can bridge that divide that obviously exists at the moment. And I think there's a lot of work in the future to find a way to deal with it.
Again, I go to the late Slavko Goldstein, but also other materials. It's a lot of groups, really ultra right-wing groups that also manipulate with this data, but even more, it was some narratives that are saying that the Jasenovec after the Second World War was actually used for having forced labor camps in Yugoslavia.
Well, these kind of individuals, and I guess you can call them the Holocaust deniers, they existed throughout from the 1990s, 2000, but they were not organized, and you can find some book or some article here and there. But what changed in the last few years is that they decided to organize themselves and work together, and in 2015 they founded their NGO, I guess you can call it like that, and they become more prominent in public, and of course now with internet, with social networks, they can easily spread their ideas to the public, and even in the last few years, one of those books was promoted on a national television, which again created outrage, and we do issue certain statements from time to time, and we are very much aware that this group exists, and they are trying to bring this false narrative into the public. So basically, what they are trying to say that Ustasha camp from 1941 until 1945 was a labor camp, and there were no mass executions in this period. So some people died from diseases, and that's basically it. And they are actually turning things around and say that most of the killings in the area of Jasenovac happened after liberation of the camp in 1945, when partisans committed mass killings of what they considered Croatian patriots. And this kind of reverse logic is something they're trying to show to the public. And this is also another problematic issue that exists in society, because kind of general public that doesn't have really time to go to the archives to do the research on their own. They like easy solutions, easy answers, and to say that Ustasha, meaning Croats by ethnicity, didn't commit those killings during Second World War, it kind of sounds like a good history to them, and some tend to believe those stories. And we are living in this age of fake news, and a lot of this is happening on the internet, online, with social networks. And I think it's also another challenge for Croatian society, how to deal with those stories, and how to show what actually happened in the camp during Second World War, the atrocities, the mass killings, so people would know actually this important historical information. So.
And on the level of law, doesn't exist like in Germany actually that you are prosecuted if you deny historical facts and genocides, as Jasenovac was the place of this manipulating with the data, manipulating with the facts.
Yeah, how the law treats Holocaust deniers?
There is an article in the law. It is forbidden to deny Holocaust, genocide, war crimes. Yes, but I never heard that anybody was tried under that article. And when you read this article, it is a little bit, I would say, confusing. But they say it's illegal to deny Holocaust, genocide, and war crimes in a manner that perpetrates hate. So I guess the article thinks that there are two ways to use the Holocaust denial. One way to not perpetrate hate, another way to perpetrate hate. So I guess you would have to prove two things if you want to sentence somebody based on this article. First, that they did deny something, and the second, that they used it in a way to promote hate against certain ethnical groups. So it's very, for me at least, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a historian, so it is when confusing the way this article was written, but it does exist in Croatian law. But as I said, nobody was really trialed under that article.
Yeah, what do you think, what the political establishment or establishments in the future could do, and what should be done in order to position the memory of Jasenovac as an example or a tool of proper historicization of the period and everything that happened?
From what I know, from contacts with other similar memorials in Europe, usually they have several departments, the way the memorial functions. So you have a research department or scientific department, you have a museological department, and you have educational department. These are the three main ones. So the way that Jasenovac's memorial site was established, even when we go back in Yugoslavia in the 1960s, and the way it functions now, is basically mainly as a memorial museum. So this is the main emphasis of the memorial. So for the visitors to visit the memorial museum. But I think it would be important to work on development of the institution, because at the moment we only have 4 curators that work here, and they have to do all of that. They have to prepare some temporary exhibitions. They have work guided tours with the school groups or student groups or any other groups that visit the site, and they have to go to the archive and try to do some research if they have time. So I think to get more people employed in the institution, that would be kind of first step. And if we can have also the way that you can really specialize for one thing, for educational work, for research and scientific work, and for the museological work, I think it would again help with the development of the institution. Also, we are in a talk at the moment with Ministry of Education to try to make this allocation of the funds to make it easier for the schools, for the teachers who would like to visit memorial site, to make it more accessible, that those trips to the site won't have to be financed by the school children or the parents. So that would be another good step. So there are a lot of challenges ahead of us in the future, and I think what I mentioned earlier, this whole memory of the Second World War in Croatia is still kind of challenging issue for the whole society. And there are, I guess, as a whole society, we have to find a way to work together. And if we're going to be very much divided on those issues, it's going to be hard to make some kind of improvements in the future. And only way, if we can find some common ground and some terms that we can all agree on, it's the only way forward. If not, the situation will remain same for years or maybe even decades to come.